There's an obsession against the Jewish people in Israel. There's an obsession. And it's been throughout time, and you know this. You know, you have a bunch of Sibylem and Tanakh in the back of your room, and you should know Jewish history of how the world is always finding a way to see the Jewish people as a source of the problem, and you're playing into that.
The problem with the claim of this double standard claim, right, is to establish that you think is a double standard, one has to make some evaluation of how serious the human rights abuses are, right?
And saying that Israel has the most serious human right violation abuses compared to all the countries in the world?
Not in general. People don't need me to use words for them to see that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is fundamentally unjust.
No, they use you as an excuse for their anti-Semitic agenda. Israel has the ability to change, but does not have the responsibility to be blamed. That's the difference.
Do you think that Palestinians and Israeli Jews are treated equally in the West Bank?
I don't think a Jew has a right to have any equality in Area A, and I think Palestinians don't have any equality in Area C, and there's major problems in Area B. So if we're going to talk about the injustice, there's an injustice throughout the board and in many different ways, and it's not a competition. I believe in a reality from the river to the sea, which would probably also eventually include Jordan, where every single Israeli and Palestinian has full equal rights. That's what I believe.
They have those now.
No, I don't have a right to go into Area A. Palestinian doesn't have a right to go into Area A.
Do all Israeli Jews in the West Bank have the right to vote to have citizenship in Israel?
In Israel, yes. They don't have a right to have any representation in the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas.
Do any Palestinian citizens under Israeli control in the West Bank have the right to have citizenship in the country in which they live?
Palestinian citizens that don't live in the country of Israel, they do not. Just like I don't have a right to have rights over there. You see where there's a difference?
None of the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, all of whom live under the ultimate control of Israel.
Live under the Palestinian Authority.
They live under the, okay, we're back to this.
Because the IDF can go in once in a while for a legitimate reason, that means that there's no control that the Palestinian Authority has.
You yourself admitted that the Israeli army can go in to every single area of the West Bank if it wants to. It just decides how often it wants to.
Per the agreement and accordance with the Palestinian Authority.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so when someone goes and kills someone, they need to go and take that person and stop him from doing that again. Yes.
Those Palestinians live under Israeli control, right? Israel controls the airspace. Israel controls the borders. Israel controls the telecommunication spectrum. The IDF can go wherever it wants in the West Bank and arrest people, right? And so the question is, do any of those people have citizenship in that state who are Palestinian?
They don't live in the Israeli state, so they don't have rights in that state. But I do want one day for them to have rights in that state. But
Go ahead.
The Israeli Arabs, who are also Palestinian, the same members, do have equal rights. The reason why the Palestinians who are living under the Palestinian Authority or under Hamas don't have equal rights within Israel is because they're not under Israel. They're not Israeli civilians.
What about from 1967 to 1987, about 1993, before the Palestinian Authority was created? Who were they living under then?
Right. Well, if we go even earlier, in 1967, when there was a war waged by the surrounding countries to eliminate Israel and attempt to ethnically cleanse and drive them from the river to the sea, there's consequences to the war. And eventually, with the Oslo Accords, they decided to partition this land into three different areas.
But you just skipped over 1967 to 1993. What state were those Palestinians?
What caused it to be controlled under that state? Right? It's not Israel that decided, you know what, I'm going to go into Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and just take control and not give people rights. No, the surrounding Arab countries waged the war, and you have a right to annex a land in a defensive war. Happens to be unfortunate that Israel didn't annex that land, and eventually the solution was found between the Israelis and Palestinian Authority to create this area A, B, and C, which I disagree with. It's a horrible decision. It's a horrible situation. Palestinians are suffering. They have to go through checkpoints. When they go from one place to the next, they don't have access to resources that they should, to development of infrastructure, and so many different things that are happening. I want Palestinians to see an IDF soldier and feel that that is an army that represents them. That it does not currently exist. But when you're looking at information and you're saying because the IDF can sometimes, very rarely, go in for a specific legitimate reason to take out someone, that means that that person de facto is now under the Israeli state and they don't have equal rights into the Israeli state. But you never, ever, ever criticize the fact that I don't have a right to go to Hebron and to Shechem and to Bethlehem and to these places that are part of my ancestral land. So all I'm saying is to be equal.
I believe,
if you're going to criticize the movement for Palestinians, criticize the movement for Jews.
Because I believe that Israeli Jews and Palestinians should be treated equally. I believe that Israeli Jews should be allowed to live anywhere in the land, including Hebron or Shechem or whatever, as living under legal equality with Palestinians. But I think the fundamental problem is that when I say that Israel controls the West Bank, right, all of the West Bank, and denies Palestine and Palestinians who live under the control of the Israeli state don't have legal equality with Israel, don't even have citizenship, don't have free movement or due process or the right to vote for the government that controls their lives. I am speaking something that is not only that is the consensus among not just Israel's human rights organizations, but among Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, in Yesh Din, and the United Nations. Now, what I'm going to be told is that all of these organizations need to be disregarded because they're self-hating, anti-Semitic, can't be trusted, and I have to trust Rudy, right?
I don't use the term self-hating. I don't like that term. But again, you said Israel controls everything, and Israel doesn't control everything. There's a mix of control. And this is where I'm saying to be more specific. I'm not saying not to talk about the fact that Palestinians are at times having an IDF soldier go into their house to arrest someone or looking for someone, and that they have no representation towards this government, that its army is going and doing something, and it should have representation. That's an injustice that is happening, but there's a context as to why it happened. You know, you're talking about certain dates where there was no Palestinian Authority, but there's a context as to why that happened before. So all I'm saying is to include the context, and if you're going to criticize that a Palestinian does not have a right to live freely from the river to the sea, also talk about that a Jew does not have yet the right to live from the river to the sea. And B'ezrat Hashem, one day there will be a reality where we all have a right to live from the river to the sea. But in order to be able to get there, we have to not be weaponizing one side suffering as a way to attack and create sole responsibility onto the other side, because that's actually fuel to allow this conflict to continue.
It's not weaponizing people's suffering to speak about fundamental conditions of oppression and say that one believes that that Palestinians and Jews should be treated equally. It's not weaponizing Palestinian suffering to acknowledge that Israel is the power as a state that has massively more power than its subcontractor, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which doesn't have an army and doesn't have a state. That's not weaponizing Palestinian suffering.
Is it more? Is it all? Because at first you said Israel controls everything, and now you said it has more power.
Israel has ultimate authority, and it subcontracts part of that authority to the Palestinian Authority.
Does the Palestinian Authority also have authority? Also have power?
It has no ultimate authority. No, all of its authority,
the day-to-day life for Palestinians in Palestinian Authority.
All of its authority is granted to it by Israel. If Israel wanted to arrest every member of the Palestinian Authority tomorrow and shut down the Palestinian Authority and go back to the situation between 1967 and 1993, it could do that.
I mean, a lot of countries can do a lot of things to eliminate or change situations. That doesn't change the fact that the Palestinian Authority has authority over Area A and municipality authority over Area B. Now, the fact that they have that control, if Israel had control there, I'd be able to go there. I'd be able to move there. I don't. So they
that's Israel's decision.
But they do have control at the end of the day, and with that control, they create injustices as well.
Israel has decided that it doesn't want Israel.
You see how it always goes back to Israel. It always goes back to Israel.
Israel has
the ability to change, but does not have the responsibility to be blamed. That's the difference. I do think Israel has the power, thus the responsibility to change the status quo, and we should be more critical for it to use that power to change the reality and to develop something that is equal and just, that me and you would probably both agree with. But to always take the situation, and because Israel has the ability, then blame it for all the consequences of the things that were done for us. This is where you go and you create a double standard. This is where you go and you don't include the nuance that describes our suffering.
I think the fundamental difference is you seem to think that the Palestinian Authority has some independent sovereignty over some territory in the West Bank. I just don't know a single human rights organization that would agree with that, or frankly, any independent legal expert who would agree with that.
You don't know a single one of the anti-Israel organizations that you quoted earlier that would agree with it. No, come on. You were going to say that United Nations is a bunch of good humans. It's those countries putting their people into power to push their global politics. You know, there's not a group of people. And Amnesty International, like it's like when you talk about criticizing October 7th, and then you quote Amnesty International. Like, where's the dissonance? These organizations that are obsessed with holding a double standards against the Jewish people and to make us look bad in every situation that they can, to manipulate information, and then you're going to say, and you want me to take you seriously when you criticize October 7th, which, by the way, I was there. I fought on October 7th in Kfar Aza. I had many friends die next to me. So when a Jew talks about October 7th, of course, it's valid. You're a Jew. You're a brother of mine. But when you're going to go and source things that are very clearly by the Jewish people seen as these are people who are manipulating
the Jewish people, Rudy? Are you speaking on
majority of the Jewish people, the majority of Israelis see B'Tselem and Shovrim Shtika and all these organizations as traitors. They see Amnesty International and the United Nations as organizations who have an objective to sell something to the world that is obsessed with Israel and the Jewish people. And you're playing into it.
That may be what a majority of Israeli Jews believe, right? It doesn't mean that it's true. In fact, it's funny, what I notice is that when Amnesty International does report, or Human Rights Watch does reports about Chinese abuses in Xinjiang, or Russian abuses in Ukraine, or abuses in Myanmar or Zimbabwe, all of a sudden, actually, people treat them as pretty credible. It just turns out that when they happen to do, and when they do reports about Palestinian human rights,
how many reports do they do against those countries compared to they do against Israel?
Many. They work globally and do many reports about places all over the world. You know what the Chinese and Russian government think about Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International? The Indian government, they've often expelled these groups because they hate them, because they say exactly the same thing.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Sorry, let me finish. They say exactly the same thing. They say exactly the same thing because they don't like the human rights criticism that you are saying about this group.
No, I like to criticize where there are human rights, but when there's double standards, that's very clear with these organizations. How many resolutions against countries that have far more death counts?
You're talking about the UN.
The UN, or how many reports does Amnesty International do compared to other countries to Israel? There's an obsession against the Jewish people in Israel. There's an obsession. It's been throughout time, and you know this. You know, you have a bunch of Tanakh in the back of your room, and you should know Jewish history of how the world is always finding a way to see the Jewish people as a source of the problem, and you're playing into that. It's very clear that there's a bias here. And so a lot of these organizations and a lot of media companies as well have an objective. They realize where the demographics are. They realize that the people are hungry to find a way to look at Israel to be the bad guy. And so they're going to focus their resolutions in that direction, and of course remove all the context to make Israel look as the bad guy. And when you go and source those sources as saying that's what makes me legitimate, that's in the eyes of the Jewish people what makes you illegitimate.
You can speak about statistics, and I think you're right. The majority of Jews, certainly in Israel and the United States, would take a position different than mine in my support for an equal binational state. That's true. But the problem with the claim of this double standard claim, right, is to establish that you think is a double standard, one has to make some evaluation of how serious the human rights abuses are, right? And
saying that Israel has the most serious human right violation abuses compared to all the countries in the world?
Not in general, but I do think that Israel is committing the crime of apartheid, and I think that many international legal scholars, including Israeli-born ones, now think it's even crossed into genocide.
To respond to that, I think that these are using blanket statements and playing on the emotional struggles that other peoples have had in order to convince them that Israel's doing the same thing that happened in South Africa, or Israel's doing the same thing that happened in Rwanda. For something to be a genocide, you and I both know that there has to be an intention to massacring a population. Israel's intention is never to kill civilians. It is always to take out Hamas or Hezbollah, and very unfortunately there are civilians that are killed in the process. But to try to go and say that there is a genocide happening there, you very well know that that is, again, another anti-Semitic blanket statement to make Israel seem as evil. And apartheid as well. We know that apartheid is a specific term that was coined to talk about South Africa. Now people are using it as a general term to describe specifically Israel, not even any other countries. And we know, yes, there were Bantu states and other systems, but fundamentally at the end of the day, there was one country with one government, with one force, with different rights for different peoples based on skin color. Right now, there's a separation of land where I don't have rights to go into Gaza. I don't have rights to go into Judea and Samaria, into Area A, and that is wrong. The same way it is wrong for Palestinians not to be able to access the entire land and to have equality for all of us. That's not apartheid. What I'm saying, let's be more specific to describe the experiences Palestinians go through and Jews go through to create a better reality for both of us, rather than using words to demonize people and to make people think that Israel is an evil force.
But people don't need me to use words for them to see that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is fundamentally unjust.
No, they use you as an excuse for their anti-Semitic agenda.
I just empirically don't buy your argument that people who say things like me are contributing to anti-Semitism. I actually think we're combating anti-Semitism, but I also do try to speak with as much detail and nuance as in my analysis of what I think is true as I think you do, Rudy. We just disagree about certain things.
I mean, 100% of your 100 last tweets about specifically the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were all anti-Israel. That's not providing nuance. There's no criticism of things that Hamas is ever doing.
It happens at this particular moment in time, right? I don't know how many days those tweets were over. It happens over this particular moment in time that there are tremendous war crimes, I believe, being committed by Israel in Gaza with my money.
If you look at your tweets, not just in this time, throughout time, the majority of your tweets when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is probably 90% throughout time. It happens to be 100% over the last 100 posts. But 90% is going to be about finding a way to make Israel look bad. And all I'm saying is bring a little bit of nuance. You know, no one is saying that criticizing Israel is bad. I don't know one Israeli that doesn't criticize Israel. I criticize Israel all the time. But when that's all that you're doing and the image that you're presenting is always, how do I find a way? Maybe I'll mention October 7th so that I can like be seen as like, okay. But then everything I'm doing in practice is to try to make Israel look bad. Like, no, I'm saying this. I'm saying this honestly as a brother. It hurts when we see people like you doing that.
I blame Israel to the degree that I am complicit in what happens because my taxpayer money is involved in that. I have a greater moral responsibility for things that I am paying for than things that I am not paying for. That seems to me a basic
I feel like that's a
proposition as an American.
Like at the end of the day, we should be against the U.S. foreign aid to Israel, not because it's your money going anywhere, but because that forces Israel to be dependent and to push policies that doesn't benefit the region. That's why we should be critical of the thing, not because you paid some taxes and the aid is going there. We can be critical of the policies that we're against without jumping to using these terms to make Israel look evil. And that's, I think, the fundamental thing that we disagree with. I think we'll agree on the specifics, but when we go on the macro, you speak in a language that at the end of the day, someone hears and they're like, what? You see, another Jew that affirms my belief that Israel is the source of all problems.
To me, the fundamental impulse, the obligation is to speak what I believe is true. How other people respond to that is not something I have control.
What I will say is what you say has value and has effect on others. And I'm not saying say something different, but maybe when you say something differently by adding more information or more context or being more specific on situations, there is no future where Israelis or Palestinians will be disconnected from the land, because even the Palestinians, the vast majority of them, descend from Jews that were converted to Christianity and Islam, mixed with other Arabs who've poured in and have created this new post-colonial identity that has developed after the colonization of Judea by the Romans. And we both exist here. We both have a connection to this land, and that is eternal. So at some point, we have to come together and to figure out what are the non-negotiables on both sides, which there are clear non-negotiables on the Israeli side and clear on the Palestinian, and they're different and they do not compete, and to try to work that together. And I think the energy that we have as we go and do this work in the world and speak our message and to try to change minds, we should be using our energy to try to get us to that future reality where we live together with justice, and not just use justice as a tool to go and say, oh, I can speak against the Jewish people in Israel and have a lot of people agree with me and like me, even though it's not really doing anything to change. In my opinion, that's my critique, but I do appreciate you giving us the time to be able to engage.
So do I.
Thank you both. This was awesome. You guys are awesome. All right.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Nice to talk to both of you.
Likewise, Achi.